Well, hello everyone. Welcome back from lunch for this very casual talk about sex that's happening somewhere else. So my paper and presentation, Reproduction, Productivity, Sex, an examination of Cuban culture around sexual health and pregnancy, like in my intro, was born from a lot of interests, but particularly was born out of my interest in the Cuban healthcare model. The Cuban healthcare model is very significantly different from the one we have here. And it's different not just in the way it affects people, but in its very foundations. The way we approach things here in Canada, and in fact in North America and Europe, is very different from the way Cubans think about things, and particularly the way they approach what we would call rights and reproductive rights. Even the way we say that phrase in English. Rights. What are rights? What are human rights? That's a debate we have a lot, especially here at King's, and those are conversations that can kind of cycle around. Well, why do humans deserve certain rights? You know, why should people have access to contraceptives? Is that a right? Is it something that should come inherently? Whereas in Cuba, things are a little bit more cut and dry. If it's good for your health, you deserve it. Because for them, the way they conceive of, the revolution and their society and their culture, one of the central pillars is health, right? If it's healthy for the population, then it's healthy for the revolution, then they want it. So this health-based approach you will see in every aspect of Cuba when you go there. I saw it a lot when I personally ended up in the hospital. I was fine. They tested me for Zika, which I did not have. But they were very thorough, and it was a very interesting look. And when it comes to sex in particular, when you're looking at Latin America, you sometimes get the spicy lover. I'm sure we've all seen it. We've all seen an Antonio Banderas movie, even though he's Spanish, right? Like, oh, seductive, amazing, sexy, and like the women too. We've all seen like salsa dancers. And that also is a very real part of their culture. And so when you have sex and you have medicine, when they interact, it's obviously going to create some interesting effects. When it comes to reproduction specifically, that's a very real thing for, usually women, but anyone with a uterus, because that's mainly what they're going to be seeking attention for medically if they just have a healthy adult life. If you get pregnant, obviously you want to be seeing a doctor. It's a very intense process for the body. And culturally as well, reproduction has always been an issue. The creation of new life in humans is a cultural and societal importance. I forgot to change there, but in case we didn't know where Cuba was, it is very close to the United States. It's in the Caribbean, and it's extremely different from all of those neighbors. Everywhere you see, it's very different, even other Caribbean islands. And to really illustrate that difference, I thought this quote from the United Nations Population Fund would be of importance. So in 1994 in Copenhagen, they said that reproductive rights embrace certain human rights that rest on the recognition of the basic right of a couple and individuals to decide freely and responsibly on the number, spacing, and timing of their children, and to have the information and means to do so, and the right to attain the highest standard of sexual and reproductive health. It also includes their right to make a decision concerning reproduction free of discrimination, coercion, and violence. So according to this 1994 definition, Cuba checks all the boxes. They have maternity hospitals. Even women in the most remote rural areas have access to the highest standards of reproductive rights. I saw that firsthand when I was in a jungle in the middle of Cuba. They have everything going for them. They have comprehensive family planning from the very beginning to the very end. They have psychological services, everything they have going for them. But there is an issue with this definition, and in fact there's an issue with Cuban healthcare model, which is just that people have sex for fun and not always to have babies. I'm sure we can all attest, just ask any teenager out there, and people are going to continue to have sex forever without the goal of having babies. And one of the organizations that really kind of brought that to the attention to the forefront is the Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, or the Federation of Cuban Women, the largest NGO in the world. It encompasses every Cuban woman. They are the ones who made abortion legal and accessible. They're the ones who really promoted that. Before the triumph of the revolution in 1959, which is what they call it, abortion was legal, and then it got banned when the revolution triumphed, and then it got legal again in 1979, so a real turnaround there. That woman up there is Vilma Espín, Raul Castro's wife, and an amazing, intelligent lady. Please look her up. She's amazing. But they really brought reproduction to the forefront of Cuban society. Their argument was that if you have literally half of the revolution unable to join in and be productive members of the society because they're at home, because they're suffering from, all of the millions of troubles you can have creating human life, then you're not going to have a successful revolution. So after they succeeded in creating this family planning, they really took that healthcare approach. They really said, you're right, if a woman or anyone with a uterus is struggling to go to work or is struggling to be productive members of society because they're having to be at home, because they're having to suffer from health issues, then you're really not going to have a very great thing to do. But again, this isn't really addressing the issue that people are going to have sex without really thinking of babies, right? That is that is sometimes an accident of having sex. So again, with the family planning and the contraceptions, that was always just a secondary thing. It's like, yes, of course people are going to have sex outside of marriage. Of course people are going to have sex outside of the monogamous relationship. But that's not really our concern. We're more concerned with creating new members of the revolution, creating new members of this socialist, space. And another thing that was created because of this mentality was the fear of contraception. The Cuban perception is that contraception is not very good. It doesn't work. They don't really trust it. And that seems a little strange, especially when they have a more comprehensive sexual education than some of the ones I've seen here in Canada. But it's less strange once you realize that one condom is 5 kooks, which is about $5. So one condom is $5 because of the embargo. They don't really have the means to bring in the materials to create these contraceptives, especially birth control as well. So there's a real distrust of that. So what ends up happening is that this mixed with the availability of abortion and the societal acceptance of abortion is that sometimes Cuban women will just have sex, get pregnant, and then get an abortion, and then that'll happen multiple times in their lives, which is not very good for their long-term health. So you have this weird situation where reproductive sex is meeting recreational sex, which is something I've written a lot in my notes. And here's a spicy Latin dancer. Love that. And really, the way they're thinking about sex is not the way they're thinking about reproduction. Those things are really, really separated from each other in a way that isn't true in real life. I'm sure anyone who's had a baby can attest. But the fundamental cultural shift that was brought on by the socialist revolution brought a lot of really good things, like the health care that they enjoy in Cuba, which is a lot better than the one we have here. Clashed with the pre-revolutionary, more machista attitude towards sex, where like the men are macho punks who are just very virile, and then women are either like whores or virgins. And with the revolution, everything became theoretically equal, the socialist revolution, now nobody's racist and nobody's sexist and we're all equal, which was obviously not true. And that's something that they're dealing with more and more today. The theoretical equality, the divorcing of recreational sex from reproductive sex, on the one hand they have the medicine that's really good for them, and then on the other hand they have this Cubans have a lot of sex. To quote a professor who shall remain anonymous, quote, "I don't think Canadians are comfortable with sex." That is really the standard from your neighbors to the south looking up. And especially with women, because of this access to family planning and reproduction, they now have a dual life that they lead, where on the one hand, they're productive members in that they have jobs, they have professions, they're out in the street doing things. I think engineers, 51% of engineers in Cuba are women. But then on the other hand, they're still doing all of the work at home and all of the labor at home. I have a very interesting picture here from the Cuban Parliament. That's a lot of brown skin and a lot of women. They have a highly representative parliament. This also represents a lot of their working fields. Obviously, some fields are more female-dominated or more male-dominated, and obviously non-binary people don't exist. And on that note, speaking of non-binary people, this discussion is really incomplete if we don't take into account that gay people exist and that gay people also have sex. And specifically that some of those gay people can still have babies and still often do have babies. And they also get barred from the family planning that I said was so great before. When you're looking at things like gay couples that may not be able to have children on their own, adoption is not something that happens in Cuba, so they're completely barred right from the get-go. So family planning is just not for them unless they happen to acquire a child somehow. But when it comes to LGBT people with uteruses or who can have their own families, bisexual or lesbian women, they are often barred from family planning as well because medically it doesn't matter if you're gay or not, right? If you're taking this medical model of if it's good for their health and it's good for the revolution, well, we're going to have babies anyway, so why should we create a space for these gay and lesbian women who also want to have babies, right? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And also, like I said, this machista attitude is not only about gendered roles, but is also about homosexual people. In fact, in the beginning of the revolution, around the 60s and 70s, there was actually work camps for LGBT Cubans. But now, this was taken at one of their pride events. And the reason they had this shift was also because of the medical model. A trans woman actually wrote into the government and said, I feel like I put myself in danger by presenting as the gender that I feel I am, which is a woman, but then going to the doctor and then having on all my charts saying, well, I'm a man. That's dangerous for them and that's dangerous for their health because they're not accessing their doctors, they're not accessing all that healthcare that they should be accessing. And that's why there's now a shift that you can see. The shift doesn't really extend to family planning, and it certainly doesn't extend to sexual education. Cubans aren't being taught about gay sex. They're not quite there yet. But on the other hand, things like gender-affirming surgery, psychological services, those are all things that are available not just to the transgender individual, but as well to their family. There's an amazing book on it by Dr. Emily Kirk. She works at Dal. I suggest giving it a read. It's very interesting. And aside from the LGBT community being sidelined when it comes to reproduction, family planning, and sex, another major group that is being sidelined by these services is the prostitutes, the sex workers. Cuba has a very strict anti-prostitution law, but that really doesn't stop the tourists from asking for sex and for people to take money for sex. And when those things happen, obviously, sometimes accident babies happen. But if you're suspected of prostitution, you're going to be sent to jail before you're going to be given comprehensive family planning. So what are the things that we can learn from Cuba, and what are the things that we can take or leave, right? I think that as Canadians, but also as just, North Americans or Europeans, we can take this healthcare model and really run with it. If it's good for the people, then it's good for the country, is a model that has given them one of the best healthcare systems in the world. Their major source of income as a country is their doctors. A Cuban doctor is an amazing thing to have in the rest of Latin America, but not so much here in Canada. So that's one thing. One of the things we can leave, though, is this machista attitude of, just sex being this weird thing that everyone really wants and is very, open about, but no one talks about it, because then that would mean actually dealing with things like STDs, contraceptives. So we need to marry this medical model with a more culturally acceptable model of being able to say people have sex, and sometimes that's to have fun, and sometimes that's to have a baby. And sometimes sex can be both. So Canada can learn a lot from Cuba, but I also think Canada can learn from Cuba's mistakes. Thank you.